Hello everybody, my name is Kat and welcome back to my channel where we talk about all things horror. And I am so excited. Today is the day I feel like I've been waiting for since last December. I have been waiting for this movie all year and I finally got to see it and finally get to talk about it. And that is Robert Eggers' Nosferatu. I was lucky enough to be able to attend one of the special preview screenings that Focus Features did on Friday the 13th, and it was a lot of fun. They gave us like these posters and they also gave us these cool like little beanies. I don't know if you can see, it says like Nosferatu on the bottom there. I'm not going to wear this during the review just because it's kind of hot. So this is going to be a primarily non-spoiler discussion of the film. I would say that if you are interested in seeing this, go out and see it in a theater. It is definitely worth paying for the theatrical experience. The preview screening that we saw it in, we got to see it in an IMAX theater. So I would highly recommend to get the IMAX experience at either the Regals or the AMC theaters, just because it's a very atmospheric film, and so you're gonna definitely get the benefit of having like the bigger screen and the louder sound. And some of this film does take place during Christmas time, so it is technically a Christmas horror film. I'm not going to be getting into like specific plot details, but I will be talking generally about the narrative and the characters and the overall themes of the film. So I would say if you're someone that doesn't want any kind of spoilers, just wants to go in like completely blind. And I do think there is a benefit to going into this movie not really knowing where it's going to take you. I would say like try to avoid any videos or reviews until after you've seen it. But again, if you're just more interested in the general aspects of it, that's what we will be going over today. In many ways, this is a classic Robert Eggers film. If you are a fan of his previous work, then I think you will love Nosferatu, in the sense that it is a period piece, and as with all of his films, he takes the historical aspects of it very seriously, in everything from the costuming of the characters to the architecture. And of course, with all of that, you also have the historical folklore. You have a lot of the occult weaved in there in the narrative. On a purely technical level, Robert Eggers, I feel like, has proven himself to be a very competent filmmaker. You can tell when you're watching his movies that he has such a strong vision for how he wants to frame certain shots, how he wants certain actors blocked within the scene. Like, you can just tell that he's a director that spends a lot of time just like thinking about his projects and researching them, and again really just like creating this very full, very rich vision. And you definitely have that in Nosferatu as well. In many ways, this film reminded me of The Witch, and I feel like I remember reading at one point, Nosferatu is a film that Robert Eggers has been wanting to make his whole career, and I feel like I remember reading that the reason why he even did The Witch in the first place was to kind of be his calling card to Hollywood, to kind of prove to the film industry like, hey, I could take on a film like Nosferatu and here's my proof of that. So The Witch and Nosferatu have very similar themes, especially around this whole idea of having a female protagonist that is, you know, feeling repressed, feeling very out of place in the world and the society that she's living in, as well as a female protagonist that has just these kind of innate connections to the paranormal, the supernatural. Also the fact that it's like you have a female protagonist that is kind of stuck in the middle between patriarchal society expectations and then this other supernatural, sinister male figure that is kind of seductive but is also trying to control the female protagonist in a way, right? So you're having a female protagonist that's just getting like repressive like male figures on either side of her life. So a lot of similarities to The Witch. Like now seeing his version of Nosferatu, I'm like, yeah, I can see why he's saying that The Witch was kind of his calling card to try to get this film made. I will say though, I feel like this film had less of the like old English, kind of hard to understand dialogue that you do get with films like The Witch or The Lighthouse. I feel like I didn't have a hard time understanding any of the characters, and usually when I watch a Robert Eggers film, I do struggle with that a bit. I don't know if Focus Features was just like, hey man, we need this movie to be more mainstream, like just use regular dialogue. I did at times have trouble understanding Nosferatu when he was speaking. And that might have just like been my ears and the way that the sound was coming through the system in the theater. There were times that he was speaking and I was kind of like, what? But overall, I would say that this film, for the most part, lived up to my expectations of it going in, right? I went in with pretty high expectations because I was like, again, Robert Eggers has proven himself to be a competent filmmaker. And visually, this is a very stunning film. He creates these just very beautiful atmospheres. There's a lot of exterior shots of like streets and carriages, and it's dark, and you have like the snow falling down, and it feels very like gothic, eerie, but it's also very enticing to look at the same time. And you get the classic, you know, Robert Eggers wide shots where you have a character that is in a very gorgeous natural environment, and you just get to see like how small they really are in this world that they're living in. And even in the interior scenes, because a lot of this film does take place in interior locations and house locations, specifically in bedrooms, but I feel like even in those scenes, like just the way he's framing it, like it feels big and it feels wide and it feels, I guess, immersive, for lack of a better word. Somehow he manages to make it feel claustrophobic because of all the eerie stuff that's happening, but the framing itself feels very like big and wide, and like he's just like putting you in these environments with the characters. I feel like the visuals alone are enough to go see this in a theater, and if you are someone that is interested in photography or cinematography or just visual like framing, go see this movie because you'll find like inspiration in it somewhere. Like some of the shots are just so beautiful. It was one of those things where I was like, I just want to like pause the film. I just want to take a screenshot of this frame and put it on my wall. There's also this interesting dreamy quality that he's creating with the visuals here. There's a running theme throughout the film where people are talking about like Nosferatu and the vampire and how he is just this shadow figure, right? Nosferatu just representing like pure evil darkness. And there's this thing where people say like, oh, he comes in and it's like a dream and it like consumes you, and it's the darkness, it's just all encompassing. And he definitely plays with that in the visuals as well, right? There's a really nice contrast between scenes in which Nosferatu's influence isn't there, and the scenes are very like colorful and feel more natural, versus when Nosferatu's influence starts infiltrating these people in this town. And then that's when we're getting a lot more of those like blue hues that you see in the trailer, more kind of like washed out color, like it is this darkness, this dream, this nightmare. So that was cool in the way that he was creating these very dream, like very surreal visuals and playing with the blue hue in that way. Also a very nice callback to even the original F.W. Murnau silent film. You get a lot of scenes in that movie that have that blue tint to it that's supposed to represent nighttime. I just thought that was a really cool way that he was homaging the silent film while also using the color as a narrative device to tell like when characters are encountering Nosferatu or when they're in just these kinds of dark, dreary states. You also have a lot of themes of like depression and melancholy in there, right? Being sad, often related to the color blue as well. And then the casting is also amazing in this film. I'm really enjoying Lily Rose Depp as an actress. I wasn't sure how to feel about her admittedly going into the movie, only because the only other thing I've seen her in is that awful show, The Idol. I only watched a couple of episodes of that before I had to turn it off. I feel like a lot of that show was just her getting like used and abused by The Weeknd, and it was just kind of not my favorite. Whereas here I feel like she really got to show off her acting talent, and I would say she is up there with some of the best female performances in horror films this year. I've talked about this before, but I feel like we've seen this pattern with our female protagonists in horror films, just like being able to really go like crazy and feral and all out with their performances, whether they're being like possessed by a demon or they're just like consumed by, you know, psychosis or just some kind of heightened emotion. We've seen these kind of performances in films like Immaculate and The First Omen, and of course The Substance, and I feel like we have it in this film as well. There are many scenes of Lily Rose Depp where she is just completely going all out, going crazy, screaming, crying, convulsing. There were a couple of scenes where I was watching her performance and she was amazing, and I was also thinking like, is this Robert Eggers trying to prove to the studios that he could do a possession movie of some kind? I know like Mike Flanagan is now at the helm to take over the Exorcist movies at Blumhouse, but I feel like Robert Eggers with Nosferatu has proven himself like if he wanted to explore that subgenre of horror. I think he could probably pull it off really well. Lily Rose Depp was definitely my favorite character in the film. I also found her to be the more relatable one out of all the characters, and I think that's because, I will say, while I think the acting is amazing as far as the depth of characters and character development go, I feel like Lily Rose Depp's character is really the only one that we really get to understand, like her backstory, her psychology, her having to kind of make this arc from where she is at the beginning of the film to, you know, what she has to do by the end of the film. So she, out of everyone, felt like the most fully rounded, fully fleshed out characters. The others, you know, were a little bit two-dimensional, if I'm being honest. They're definitely saved by the fact that they have good actors who are performing and kind of coming in and giving these very boisterous performances. But yeah, just kind of thinking back on the film, like I feel like her character is really the only one that has a lot of depth to it, and a character that's very much expanded upon what we've seen with previous iterations of Nosferatu. As for the other performances, you have Nicholas Hoult. He was great in his role. I feel like Nicholas Hoult is always playing like the same character in these kinds of period pieces. So yeah, he was fine. Like, he was definitely not my favorite character. And again, he kind of just like comes in to be like the husband character and try to help save Lily Rose Depp, but you don't really learn that much about his character beyond that. So while watching it, it was just kind of like, okay, here's Nicholas Hoult playing a Nicholas Hoult type role. No hate to him, he's a good actor, he's cute. And then as far as the other male stars in this movie, you have, of course, Willem Dafoe, who is also playing a very typical Willem Dafoe type role, coming in and playing this academic who on one hand is very much like in the realm of scientific thought, while also being very knowledgeable and interested in the occult and in religion and in like these ancient evils, right? He's someone that, you know, lives in the realms of science and academia, but also recognizes that there are forces beyond human nature that we don't always understand, which I thought was a really interesting touch. And you do have these themes around like science versus religion or spirituality. And so I thought it was nice that you had a character that had their feet in both worlds and could understand how you kind of need both the science and the spirituality, and having these things work together in order to be able to stop evil in the world. You also have Ralph Enenson, I think is how his name, or Enenson, who's coming in and playing a doctor character, obviously a Robert Eggers alumni. He played the father in The Witch, but he's great in it. God, I just love his voice so much. So both of them are coming in and kind of playing these more caricature types. But again, the acting is so good that they can just like kind of come in and like steal the scene. And then of course you have Bill Skarsgård as Nosferatu. He is very unrecognizable as well in just his appearance and even in his voice acting, but he has like the movements of Nosferatu down like so well, like everything with like just the creepy claw hands. And what I liked about this movie too, again, if you want to go into this film like not knowing anything about it, I would say like turn off the video. But what I think this film does really well is that they don't give Bill Skarsgård the typical Nosferatu look. In many of the iterations of Nosferatu, the vampire always has that like classic rat type look, and they don't give him that in this film. They do give him a slightly different look, and I think it definitely did pay off for the type of story that this iteration of Nosferatu is trying to tell. I was actually going into it being like, I kind of hope they do something a little bit different with the look and he doesn't have that like rat face. It's hard to live up to just the creepiness of the original Nosferatu. The Herzog version of this did it well enough, but I was like, okay, I feel like we have a contemporary version of Nosferatu with the rat look that we got from Herzog, so I was happy to see that Eggers went in a different creative direction with it. And just on that note, I was really happy to see that Robert Eggers was taking the original silent film but also expanding it and doing his own thing with it, right? He's adding in scenes, he's adding in characters, he's expanding the mythology of this world. And I've said this before in videos, but for me, if you're going to do an adaptation of something or a remake of something, and something that was already like good and worked well enough on its own, what I don't want to see is just a lazy shot-for-shot remake adaptation that doesn't add anything new to the narrative or updates the themes in any kind of interesting way. So what I love about this film the most is that Robert Eggers is doing just that. Again, he's taking the story, but he's making it his own thing. I would say like the first act of this movie is a pretty, you know, I don't want to say beat for beat, but it is very similar to what you see in the silent film. And then I feel like after that, like after we meet Nosferatu and then we have other characters starting to come in, that's where it's really starting to feel more like Robert Eggers' own vision for this. And so I would say like the second and third act were probably my favorite parts of the film, because those are the parts where I was like, okay, I actually have no idea where you're gonna take this. And it makes the callbacks actually fun to see and to point out, and not just, you know, eye roll inducing like so many remakes and adaptations tend to be. So yes, overall a very strong, very well executed vision. If I had to give it one critique, he's definitely trying to weave in a few different thematic elements into the film, and you could definitely read the monster of Nosferatu as an allegory for a few different things. So for me, like the themes he was exploring were very clear. I think I just had some trouble like figuring out how they all weave together, or like how they all fit together in the puzzle piece. For example, and again, if you want to go in not knowing many plot details, like skip ahead. At one point in the film, you have this plague that starts infecting people. And that's on par for the time period that this film is taking place in. Fear of rats coming in from ships and spreading diseases, and the threat of disease very much being connected to this overall darkness that Nosferatu is bringing onto this town of people. And so there were times where they were like, oh, it's the plague, we have to like quarantine everyone, we need to keep people in, we need to shut the city down. And it was just kind of giving like 2020 pandemic vibes, a little bit like 2020 pandemic commentary and how people just reacted to that. So you had that element to it, which I was not expecting, but I found like really fascinating when he was exploring it. But there's also a lot of other stuff, particularly with Lily Rose Depp's character, themes around depression, melancholia. There's also a lot of like psychosexual stuff that's happening with her character. Again, her character being a very repressed person, very much trying to hide their desires, having desires, and depression being connected to this all-consuming darkness. And that was also a really fascinating aspect that he was bringing to the film. I mean, the whole psychosexual aspect, like that was there in the original silent film as well. So again, I feel like we have the darkness here that could represent many different things. And after the film, I was trying to piece together like, okay, how does the stuff with the pandemic connect to female psychosexual rage and melancholia and depression? Like how are all these puzzle pieces like fitting together? I do think I need to go back and rewatch it again. And you know, there was some stuff with the female character, and again, this kind of psychosexual aspect and how that could be connected to the darkness. There were some things in there that I was a little bit like, admittedly isn't new for me with a Robert Eggers movie. There were aspects of The Witch as well, watching it and seeing what that female protagonist went through, where I was also like, I'll just say, like, I personally do not read The Witch as this female empowerment narrative that I know some people do, but we'll save that for another video. I feel like the stuff with Lily Rose Depp's character comes through more strongly than what you have with like the kind of pandemic storyline. If I had to guess, I feel like Robert Eggers meant this to really be a story about Lily Rose Depp's character, and then the pandemic happened and maybe he was inspired by that, or maybe just me being an audience member that had to go through that experience not that long ago, and now I'm seeing it in a film. Like, maybe I'm just conditioned to think, oh, he's commenting on the pandemic, when maybe that really wasn't his intention. But very interesting ways of reading this film. My only other real critique of the movie is that I felt like sometimes the dialogue was a bit exposition heavy, particularly in regards to the relationship between Lily Rose Depp's character and Nicholas Holt's character. They're supposed to be this young couple in love, but I feel like we don't really get a lot of scenes of them being in love. Like, they kind of start off the film being pretty miserable. And in some ways I do think that connects to Depp's character and what she's going through. But I feel like we have a lot of scenes of them saying, I'm in love with this person, they are the love of my life. I think I would just maybe like to see a little bit more romantic moments with them, like these kind of smaller moments of their married life together. I feel like we actually do get that in the original silent film, just like these kind of brief moments of them actually being happy together before he gets whisked off away to go find Nosferatu. So I would have liked a little bit more of that rather than the characters just telling me that they're in love. I mean, this is a pretty long movie. It's like 2 hours and 12 minutes, and he is trying to pack in a lot of stuff within this 2 hours. And for the most part, it does work well, but you can definitely tell there are times where I wish it maybe had been a little bit more streamlined, just again to add a little bit more depth to some of these other characters. But overall, I'm looking forward to revisiting this one again in the future. Going into it, the one question that I had was, is this going to end up being my favorite horror film of 2025? I would actually still say that The Substance is probably my favorite horror film, just because I think The Substance, it's very similar to Nosferatu in the sense that it's a very strong vision, it has very strong visuals, it's very aesthetic, it has very strong performances as well, and it has a very clear theme. And while the theme is nothing new and we've seen it before, I feel like The Substance was able to explore that in a different way and also keep that theme, keep that vision very strong throughout the film, right? That whole film has a through line with this theme being the structure that's holding it all together, and just in terms of like the audacious like creativity that film went with. So those are my general thoughts on Nosferatu. I would really love to do a video or maybe a series on just a Robert Eggers like retrospective thus far, just because he does tend to have these similar themes in his movies, especially around like the psychosexual aspects and how that is often connected to darkness and evil. And that is true for both his female and male characters. I don't know if he has some kind of like Catholic guilt going on, but seeing Nosferatu very much made me want to like dive deeper into his work. If you've seen this film already, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. If you haven't seen it yet, but you're gonna go see it when it opens on Christmas, come back and let me know your thoughts after you've seen it, and I will see you next time. Thank you so much for watching.